top U.S. commander for the Middle East announced plans for partial troops withdrawal from Afghanistan and Iraq. The announcement comes months after the U.S. signed a peace deal with the Taliban, but with Afghanistan still experiencing attacks, most recently against the country's vice president. Is it safe to withdraw troops now? What happens in the instance of a terrorist resurgence? And on the anniversary of 9/11, how has U.S. Middle East policies changed over the years? Joining me now to discuss all these questions and more are Zun Ahmed Han, Research Fellow at the Belt and Road Initiative Strategies Institute of Tsinghua University, Joseph Mahoney, Professor of Politics at East China Normal University, Shuja Nawaz, Distinguished Fellow at the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council, and later on, Wang Jin, Associate Professor at Northwest University of China. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan. Mr. Nawaz, in Washington, D.C., let me go to you first. General Frank McKenzie, commander of the U.S. Central Command, made the announcement that troops numbers would be reduced in Iraq by the end of September and in Afghanistan by November. What do you make of the timing of this withdrawal?
I think this is part of President Trump's desire to be seen as living up to his campaign promise of exiting from the war. But in 4 years, he has not been able to effectively do it because the conditions are not right. But the big question that now remains is, what is the U.S. policy for after the withdrawal, particularly for Afghanistan and for the region as a whole? And this is unfortunately the repeating story from the beginning of this adventure in Afghanistan in 2001, when the U.S. went in without a clear policy or a clear vision of what it wanted to achieve, and it kept changing the goalposts. And so you have a situation which I've covered in detail in my new book, The Battle for Pakistan, which talks about the neighborhood, where you have, in 19 years now, 19 U.S. commanders in Afghanistan, and no end in sight to the U.S. involvement.
Joseph, in Washington, D.C., we've heard from Mr. Nawaz saying that this is a delivery of Trump's campaign promise. Is that how you look at it, too?
I think so. I think that, we have the election coming up in less than 2 months. Most American people are not that interested, or they don't care that much about Afghanistan. People are war-weary. They're focused on their own problems right now. The U.S. has become more insular under Trump, and certainly under the problems that we're facing with COVID-19. So with Trump's limited wins on foreign policy, he's trying to make a splash right before the election.
Well, let's look at some figures here. According to the announcement, U.S. troops in Afghanistan will be drawn down from 8,600 to 4,500. And in Iraq, it will be drawn down from 5,200 to 3,000. Zun, in Beijing, let me go to you. You have been very much involved in studying this region. What is the best strategy? What are the best things that could happen to the people in Afghanistan and to peace and stability in the region?
I think I was listening to Mr. Nawaz's and Joseph's comments as well. And actually, the truth is they both point out that for the United States, for the Trump administration, Afghanistan's, the withdrawal of troops in Afghanistan is about point scoring right before the election in November. And the other thing that we need to understand is that some people in the United States can see this as the end of a war. But for the region, for countries that share borders with Afghanistan, and most importantly for the Afghan people, what is the needed outcome? What is the way forward? Ending the war with the withdrawal of troops is not the ultimate outcome. The real thing is, how do we ensure stability and safety of Afghanistan? How do we ensure a prosperous future for the Afghan people? And actually, a few days ago, there was a report about how China, for instance, has proposed infrastructure development in the country. And this can be a way to ensure long-term stability. Another thing we know is that this adventure started actually almost 40 years ago, and the consequences of premature withdrawal have been drastic for the region in the past. We cannot repeat the same mistakes again. So we need to understand that there are countries that are key stakeholders in the peace and stability of Afghanistan. And actually, for the United States, the key issue is for another 9/11 to not repeat, which is of course important, but that has absolutely nothing to do with the long-term prosperity and the future of the people of Afghanistan. Whereas in the region, if we look at the situation, all of us countries are connected. We talk about the Shanghai Spirit, the Belt and Road Initiative here. These visions actually entail that we are invested in each other's strength and stability because we are affected by the instability in each other's countries.
Sure, we don't want to see another 9/11, nor do we want to see another ISIS or its kind. Let's look at some comments online. You know, this issue has been hotly debated and discussed all over social media. This friend, Thomas Massey, said this: "It's past time to bring our troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan. President Trump is winding down the forever wars he inherited from DC's political classes." Mr. Nawaz, we know that you know, U.S. top generals said the decision of this withdrawal is due to America's quote-unquote confidence in the Iraqi security forces, increased ability to operate independently. I mean, do you buy that? What do you make of that assertion?
I don't buy that. As I've covered this period in my new book, I keep referring to the new commanders whenever they would arrive either in Iraq or in Afghanistan. One of the first things they said was, "We are about to turn the corner." And they turned so many corners that they went round in circles. So there's a certain false optimism behind these pronouncements. I agree with Zoon that the U.S. needs a much longer-term and stabler regional policy based on economics and trade. And nobody in the U.S. is talking about that because the Trump White House is basically bankrupt in terms of new ideas. There is no relationship with Iran. There is no clear emerging relationship with Pakistan. There is hostility with China, which is a near neighbor of Afghanistan and heavily invested in the region and in Central Asia. And there is hostility with Russia, which has an increasing interest in Afghanistan. There is no economic plan to assist the Afghan people in the years after the military withdrawal occurs.
Yeah, I mean, Joseph in Washington, D.C., you know, when the troop withdrawal plan was first announced by U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper in August, he said the Pentagon has yet to brief the Congress on the plan. How is the U.S. Congress likely to react to the plan?
Well, I think if we're talking about the Republicans, I don't think you're going to see much criticism of Trump at this point, certainly not right before the election. And you'll probably see some sniping from the Democrats, but in fact, I think Biden has actually called for a faster withdrawal of more troops. So again, everyone knows that the American people are tired of this, and they're all going to pander to that sentiment.
And then Zoom, you know, there are many reports out there, actually books out there, saying that Trump was, you know, on certain occasions dismissive of, you know, the deceased soldiers. For example, he was reportedly heard saying that what's in it for them at the Arlington Cemetery when he talked about deceased soldiers of a key cabinet member. But Trump, on the record, said he wants to build the strongest military in the world, and they showed that he wanted to show that he cared about the VA, you know, the benefits of the VAs. What do you make of this contradiction?
Okay, first of all, I mean, I think the fact that President Trump, even before he got elected in 2016, I remember in one of his interviews, he said that if our leaders, if our administration had just gone to the beach and gotten a tan and done nothing in the Middle East, not gotten involved at all, things would have been better. Do I agree or disagree with that? It's a tough question to answer. But the thing is that once you're militarily involved in a country, there is bloodshed, there's destruction, there are many factors that come into play. And actually just withdrawing troops, for example, is not the solution. So I do think that interventions have had drastic consequences, and not just for the people in those countries, even for the American people. Many American soldiers have lost their lives, have suffered, and obviously the taxpayers are also paying for these wars. So war is not a solution, is not a way forward for anyone. The second question, is a war for peace a solution? Has it been so far? Well, let's look at what's happened in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and various other countries. interventions, this has not been a solution. On the other hand, if we think about possible alternative lasting solutions, then again I will refer to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or generally the Belt and Road. And the reason I say that is because they talk about, this vision talks about infrastructure development, opportunities, creation of opportunities for people. And we know that instability has a lot to do with the uncertainty that people feel in their daily lives. The inadequacy of opportunities for young people is a major factor involved in allowing or letting people get distracted and getting involved in certain ideologies, for example. So I do think that military might for the United States, I mean, it could be about prestige, it could be about deterrence, but as far as this attitude against military interventions is concerned, I think it has its positives, it has its positive and negative aspects to it, but a premature withdrawal is not the solution. It doesn't undo what has already been done, the mess that has already been made. And this is something that all stakeholders in the region have to have a clear discussion on, with the United States as well involved, that if there's premature withdrawal, that will have consequences, not just for the countries in the region and Afghanistan, but also possibly for the United States.
Mr. Nawaz, are you worried that this withdrawal might be a bit too early, leaving vacuum for, terrorists or extremists to launch attacks?
It could be, but I don't think it's going to be that critical. The reason being that the current quantum of troops in Afghanistan is not enough to fight terrorism throughout the country. The United States has invested a lot in the Afghan military, but not enough, and not at a pace that would make it a unifying force within the country. It is still lopsided, in my view, in terms of representation, particularly at the officer level. So the military withdrawal itself is not going to be decisive. What is going to be more critical, I think, for Afghanistan, and the government would probably agree with me in Kabul, is to have a continuous engagement in terms of economic development, to have a results-based system in place where aid is contingent upon the completion of targets agreed to by the donors and the Afghan government. And to bring in the region, bring Iran into the dialogue, bring Pakistan into the dialogue, bring China into the dialogue, so that they can assist Afghanistan in ensuring that it can fight against terrorism if it were to recur.
Yeah. But last time I checked, Iran, China, and Pakistan, they're not precisely the best friends of the Trump administration, unfortunately. Joseph, what do you think? I mean, are you worried that there could be a security vacuum? Because think about it. A day before the U.S. announcement of troops withdrawal, Afghanistan's vice president was targeted in a bombing.
Well, I think the fact is, starting with Obama but accelerating under Trump, although he likes to try to distinguish himself, is that the U.S. has been under, trying to come out of the war on terror with a strategic repositioning, falling back to traditional strongholds with incredible and sometimes disheartening support for Israel, for example, with the moving the embassy to Jerusalem, or supporting the leader of Saudi Arabia during his difficult moment with the Wall Street Journal reporter. So falling back to these traditional strongholds, and I think kind of abandoning Central Asia to China's advance, but hoping that China becomes mired in the various competing regional instabilities that have never been solved with great power intervention. So I think this is a twofold strategy, and as a result, I don't think the U.S. is particularly concerned about what's going to happen in Afghanistan. Again, as long as it doesn't serve as a base for launching attacks against the American homeland. And that seems to be the heart of the deal with the Taliban. Don't attack us as we're leaving, or don't do it openly, don't take credit for it, and don't support people who attack us outside of Afghanistan, and then sort it out amongst yourselves.
I mean, Zoon, as a Pakistani, how do you feel about all this? I mean, Pakistan was an ally of the United States, especially during the war on terror. I mean, how do you see the troops withdrawal from the Pakistani perspective?
I think, Frank, first of all, I'll continue the point about this mistrust between two key stakeholders within Afghanistan. Even with countries that have mature mechanisms for dialogue, engagement, even miscalculations can result in some kind of some mistakes and misunderstandings, right? So with these two stakeholders, the Kabul government and now Taliban, these miscalculations, misjudgments, mistrust can result in incidents, but this should not deter us from pushing for dialogue between the Afghan people. And that is going to be necessary for any peaceful way forward, for any sustainable way forward. As a Pakistani, I feel that definitely Pakistan and Afghanistan, we are symbiotic. We perish and we prosper together. This is the reality. We have experienced that for the past more than 40 years especially. So definitely as a Pakistani, we have also suffered because of the instability in the region. Maybe we lost the most lives after Afghanistan. So we feel very strongly about pushing for lasting dialogue, lasting peace. And that definitely means that every stakeholder, every country involved, at least it has taken us 15 years to recognize that dialogue and trust is necessary for the peace process. So as a Pakistani, I think this is the most important thing for Russia, for China, for Pakistan, Iran, all countries in the region especially, to push for meaningful dialogue and trust-building mechanism within Afghanistan. And without that, we don't see even any lasting solution, because the end of the war for the US is one thing. But as I earlier said, that the future of Afghanistan, the stability of the future of Afghanistan has stakes, and our region has long-term stakes in the domestic situation of the country, the stability of the country.
Yeah, Mr. Nawaz, in Washington, we understand that you will have to leave us soon due to technical reasons. Any final thoughts on America's, 20-year involvement, intervention in the Middle East, namely Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, I think the lesson that has been learned from the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan is quite simple. When you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. This is from Alice in Wonderland, and that has been the situation with the U.S. involvement in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. There needs to be a much greater sense of history, understanding of cultures, and understanding of the need for a regional approach to interventions if there are going to be military interventions around the globe. The U.S. cannot simply arrogate to itself the right to descend upon a country with troops, destroy it and its people and its infrastructure, and then leave when it suits it. I think that is the big lesson that is to be learned. And there should really be more focus on what Joe Biden at one time was suggesting as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is to give countries peace dividends, not war dividends. So make alliances with people that will assist you in waging peace and not in waging war.
Peace dividends, not war dividends. Thanks so much, Mr. Nawaz. Come back again, please. And on that very issue, actually, there are lots of comments online regarding America's intervention in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and in Iraq. This friend, by the name of Angie Skies8, says the U.S. war on terror has not only been a fraud and a disaster for the world, but it has damaged the average U.S. citizen. While the U.S. was displacing up to 59 million people in the Middle East, healthcare, infrastructure, and school money was used to support the endless destruction. Joseph, I mean, apparently there is some merit to this user's comment, right?
Sure. I think what we find is that that there have been a couple of things at work simultaneously. What you see, and I hate to make this comparison, but as the United States is pulling out of Afghanistan, it seems like, because I'm in Washington now, the U.S. Facing COVID, facing massive deficit spending, facing tremendous job loss, a tremendous decline in its global position. It's abandoning a lot of its commitments around the world, disengaging. It's a lot like the Soviet Union in the 1970s, early 1980s. And I think people are slowly awakening to the frustration of decades of failed policies, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when American hubris led it down the path to so many misadventures, including what's happened in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right. You know, some scholars say that U.S. foreign policy has been like a pendulum moving back and forth between isolation and intervention. We understand that we have Mr. Wang Jing, Associate Professor at Northwest University of China. Mr. Wang, welcome to Dialogue. I mean, first of all, what do you make of America's U.S. troops withdraw from Afghanistan and Iraq?
I think it's a very important measure for Donald Trump to boost his own populace inside the United States before the presidential election, as just our colleagues talked about. But I think it's a very final result of the United States intervention into the whole greater Middle East area, because we have to know that Middle East is a very complicated area and full of the different cultures and full of different traditions. So the United States, if they go back to the two decades ago, they once believed that they had the capabilities and they have the confidence to reconstruct these regions under the United States led so-called democratizing process into this region. But then what we see that this kind of process finally failed, and this is the final result of the United States intervention into the region. So that is the only, the solution that the United States could do right now is to withdraw from this region, from not only from the Iraq and Afghanistan. We also witnessed that the United States might withdraw from Syria in the future. So this is the final solution. This is the only way out for the United States themselves.
Right. You know, toppling a regime, a government is certainly different from, building a society, right? There are two different things. The latter is much more complicated, involving, institutions of rule of law, education, healthcare, etc. So, Mr. Wang, how do you look at the role of successive U.S. administrations in terms of helping, building institutions in Afghanistan?
I think that if we look at from the George W. Bush to the Barack Obama and also to the Donald Trump, they might believe that, okay, United States could be able to help and reconstruct the Afghanistan on the one hand, the military capabilities to clean up the so-called terrorists and the extremists there, and on the other hand, they hope to help construct the administrative structures inside Afghanistan to help the local people together. But that's finally failed. Why? Because the United States right now, even right today, they are still perceived by the majority of Afghanis as the invaders, as illegal. They do not have the legal status there. So even the United States military presence inside Afghanistan, they have their own duties. Their priorities are different from what they so-called the cleaning up the terrorists and extremists. So that is why the United States, they do not get the support of the local people. And also the United States does not try to get the support of the neighboring countries. And the United States needs the coordination, the cooperation of not only Pakistan, but also, for example, Iran and Russia and even China. So if these states can work very closely, I think the better effect might come out. But then what we witness is that the United States did it themselves. And then, finally, what we see that they just have to withdraw from Afghanistan. It's the only way out for the United States, although nobody wants to see it. But then it's finally, it became the reality.
Yeah, today marks the anniversary of 9/11, a truly tragic and unfortunate event that happened, 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago. Zun, how do you look at the security situation in the region, in Afghanistan, and also in your home country, Pakistan? How have things evolved over the decades? Are things getting better?
Frank, I think I'll really take it from your question and also continuation of the point you made about building a society. Sure. Us people from post-colonial societies, there was a term used in the British Raj called brown sahab, a brown person with the characteristics of a British person. To be British was to be an aspiration, basically. And this was wrong, because after we have fought for our freedoms, we are struggling. Maybe we are still trying to build the perfect societies, but we have to do it on our own, and nobody can do it for us, and nobody should do it for us. For the United States to think that they can build a society, for anyone to think that they can build a society, teach people how to think, how to study, how to learn, how to educate themselves, etc., this is wrong, actually. And this is something that is not possible, first of all, and if you try, then it's destined to fail. For the Afghan people, it is good to provide them with tools to be stable, to be able to earn, to have opportunities, but to teach them how to think, what to study, and how to build their country is, in a way, false. So I think this is the point where I feel like Afghanistan's experience right now, Pakistan's and many other countries, we share this mindset. We know that it is important for us to take ownership. We have taken it, and we know how to build the path forward. And maybe we need some assistance. Maybe we need some friendly countries to help us in that process. But that is going to be key for Afghanistan. And I feel personally, as a Pakistani, I really feel strongly about this, that we need to respect the decisions of the Afghan people and the priorities of the Afghan people and their path forward. They have to determine that. This is the most important thing.
Yeah, we feel strongly about that too. Joseph, Trump has repeatedly said that the two Middle East wars was the worst policy decision in decades. But how would you characterize Trump's own Middle East policy, if there is one?
Well, he ran against his own party, essentially. He was very much anti-Bush and of course, did everything he could to destroy George W. Bush's brother's candidacy. And he also ran against Obama. And you mentioned a moment ago that American foreign policy tends to swing as a pendulum from too much engagement towards isolationism. And I think what you actually see is, and not to be too cynical about it, is that when this policy, when these wars were launched, they were visceral reactions to an attack, and they were really driven by anger and vengeance, but as well as the politics of the moment. We govern this country and our foreign policy on the election cycle, and it's not just a 4-year presidential cycle, it's also the 2-year midterm. So I think the first problem is that you see that there's not a real ownership, there's not a real cohesive plan that moves through time, and everyone can just blame the former administration, even within the same party. In Trump's case, he ran against these two wars because they were unpopular, and despite Obama's attempts to get out, he had, of course, accelerated the drone engagement. And we had seen, of course, Syria spin out of control with ISIS. So I think that the key here is has been to try to move forward and get out. And I agree with the earlier point that the only way forward for the U.S. at this point is to get out, but it's going to leave a mess, and that's unfortunate.
Mr. Wang, we have about 20 minutes left. Any final thoughts on U.S. involvement in the Middle East?
I think that the United States is a big lesson, I think, maybe for the United States and Americans in the future, because in Afghanistan and also the Middle East is so complicating, and like the other the states of the world. The other parts of the world is not the parts of the people who do not speak English, but the Americans know. They have their own cultures and traditions, so I think United States and Americans, they have to learn how to respect the whole world.
Indeed. Mr. Wang Jin, Mr. Nawaz, Joseph, Zun, thank you all so very much for being part of this discussion. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you for watching.